The Miami Dolphins have made a lot of sneaky moves this offseason, which I believe makes the team a serious contender in the ultra-competitive AFC. Before getting into the team's 2023 offseason, how did we get to this point where we talk about the Dolphins as some elite team? Well, if you followed the NFL closely at all last season, the Dolphins were one of the better stories in the league through the first 3 months. They came out of the gates on fire, starting 3-0 with a miraculous comeback against the Baltimore Ravens, and followed that went up with the win over their division rivals, the Buffalo Bills, and another nail-biter. But then what really ended up becoming the downfall of their season appeared for the first time in week number 4 when Tua Tagovailoa suffered a scary concussion against the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday Night Football, but we'll touch on that more later in the video. Anyways, without Tua, the Dolphins would slip to 3-3, but he would come back in week number 7 and play some of the best football of his career, leading the Dolphins to a 5-game win streak and a top seed in the AFC heading into the last stretch of the season. But then the gauntlet of the Dolphins schedule appeared with games against the 49ers, Chargers, Bills, Packers, Patriots, and Jets to end the season, and this really felt like the litmus test for this team to see if they were a true championship contender or if they still had some work to do in the future off seasons. And as we know now, the moment seemed a bit bright for the Dolphins. On top of losing 5 of those games in a row, Tua would also suffer his second documented concussion of the season against the Green Bay Packers, which caused him to unravel in the later stretch of the game, throwing 3 interceptions and costing Miami the victory at home. And to make matters worse, it would also come out a day after the game that Tua did indeed suffer a concussion and he wouldn't be able to play for the rest of the season. But with the team still having playoff aspirations, rookie quarterback Skylar Thompson would be thrown into the fire against the New York Jets in week 18 to try and get the Dolphins into the postseason, and he did it somehow. So the good news for the Dolphins was they were going to be making the playoffs for the first time since 2016, but the bad news was they would be without both of their top quarterbacks in the game. Tua was out with a concussion and Teddy Bridgewater was limited with a broken finger. Skylar Thompson headed into Buffalo to play against the number 2 seed Bills, and I must say the game was a lot closer than I think anybody anticipated. The final score was 34-31, and the Dolphins even had the ball on the 50-yard line with a minute left to potentially go win the game with their 3rd string 7th round rookie quarterback. That didn't end up happening, but I think the Dolphins proved that day not only to the fans of the NFL but to all the other teams that they're really not too far away from being a really scary team. And that gets me to my main point of this video, which is all of the win now moves that the Dolphins have made in the past year to get themselves over the hump. They really took the Rams approach of F them picks, and it started last offseason when they went out and traded 5 draft picks for one of the best playmakers in the NFL in Tyreek Hill. It then carried into the season when at the trade deadline they traded a 1st round pick for pass rusher Bradley Chubb and even acquired 49ers running back Jeff Wilson to bolster up the rushing attack. So it's clear just from those moves that the Dolphins organization view their championship window as open, and they continue to attack this offseason with the same approach. You go back to last season, the Dolphins offense was the reason for the team's success. They ranked 11th in the NFL in points per game with 23.4 and the 4th best passing offense in the NFL, fueled by what many see as the best wide receiver duo in the NFL in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So the offense was noticeably electric and hard to stop, obviously, with those 2 wide receivers on the outside. But where things became problematic at times for the Dolphins was on the defensive side of the ball. And when you really break down the numbers from 2020 all the way to 2022, the Dolphins defense has fallen off more than pretty much any defense in the entire league. In 2020, when they won 10 games, the Dolphins only allowed 21.1 points per game, which was tied for 5th best in the entire NFL. And that ranking dropped all the way down to 16th in 2021. It was really most of the same starters and players on that team, so it was kind of interesting why it continued to dip down in 2021. But then again this year, the Dolphins defense took another step back, ranking 24th in the NFL, allowing 23.5 points per game. And to be fair to their defense, they did lose a lot of pieces throughout the year. Byron Jones, their cornerback, too, didn't play a single snap all season long. Emmanuel Ogbah, their leading sacker from 2020 to 2021, he also did not play much all season. And they also had a lot of depth injuries in the secondary, so they were dealing with a lot on that side of the ball. But I think the drop off from the number 5 defense in 2020 to the number 24 defense in 2022 is pretty insane. And I think that's really what cost the team throughout the years. They really could never rely on their defense, and their offense had to do all the heavy lifting week in and week out. And I think that was very obvious to everybody watching the Dolphins, including their organization, as they made a ton of changes on that side of the ball this offseason. For starters, what I think is one of the best coaching hires of the entire offseason was getting Vic Fangio, the former Denver Broncos head coach, to be the team's new defensive coordinator. They let go of Josh Boyer, who seemed to be a little bit too aggressive at times. He didn't know how to utilize all the talent on the Dolphins defense. And they brought in somebody who's known as one of the best defensive minds in all of football. He's got a ton of experience. He's got a pretty easy scheme, and he knows how to utilize his talent very nicely. He's not going to be too aggressive. He's going to play a lot of off coverage, let the pass rushers do their things up front. And I think his scheme fits the Dolphins pieces on defense very nicely, and I'm going to be really curious to see how all that plays out. But if you thought the Dolphins were going to run it back with the same defensive talent but just get a new defensive coordinator, you would be wrong. Dolphins made one of the biggest moves this offseason when they went out and traded for all-pro cornerback Jalen Ramsey from the Los Angeles Rams. Let's just be pretty honest about this. The Dolphins absolutely robbed the Rams, getting Jalen Ramsey for a 3rd round pick and tight end Hunter Long. The Dolphins drafted Hunter Long in the 3rd round 2 years ago, and he hasn't really done anything in the NFL since being drafted. He was the team's 3rd tight end, so the Dolphins really weren't concerned about giving him up in a trade. Maybe he catches on with the Rams and starts producing, but for the Dolphins, it wasn't really a huge give up for them to get one of the better cornerbacks in the entire league. And there's been a ton of chatter about Jalen Ramsey since the start of this past year. A ton of people saying he's not that good anymore, he's not a top 5 corner. That's why the Rams traded him. They want to get rid of his salary because he's not worth it anymore. In my opinion on the whole thing is I think that's crazy talk. I think it's fair to say that Ramsey didn't play up to his elite standard that he's set for his entire career this past year. He wasn't the same bona fide top 3 corner, shutting down every single top wide receiver game in and game out, but he still had a fairly good season. He was still rated as one of the best corners according to Pro Football Focus. He still had 4 interceptions. He still traveled with the opposing team's best wide receiver. And you also got to keep in mind that Ramsey had shoulder surgery last offseason, so he wasn't entirely healthy to start the year. And then also the Rams were just a dumpster fire. They were one of the worst teams in the league. Aaron Donald didn't play much last year. Matthew Stafford didn't play much last year. Neither did Cooper Kupp. All the best players for the Rams basically didn't play at all last year. And I don't think it's entirely fair to judge the only good player on the Rams for a down season when the rest of his team didn't even show up and play. So I still think Ramsey is a top 5 corner in the league. He's going to be paired with Xavier Howard now, 2 premier corners, and I'm very excited to see how Vic Fangio uses them in his scheme. But outside of the obvious headliner trade of Jalen Ramsey, the Dolphins also got some key veterans to help out that unit as well. Starting off with David Long, linebacker from the Tennessee Titans. While researching for this video, many platforms have this as one of the most underrated signings of all of free agency. David Long is one of the most underrated linebackers in football, and the Dolphins got him for a 2-year, $11 million deal, which seems like a steal. His issue has been staying healthy, but when he's on the field, he's actually a really nice and productive player. He can cover really nicely, he can stop the run, and he's still only 25 years old, so he's got a lot of football to play. And that's going to be a really nice chess piece to have in the middle of their defense with Vic Fangio moving him around. And then another really nice value signing was Deshaun Elliott, the former Baltimore Raven and Detroit Lion. I think Elliott is a really nice starting safety, and he's going to compete with the other safety, Brandon Jones, who the Dolphins also really like to play alongside Javon Holland. So that'll be really interesting camp battle, Elliott versus Jones. But whoever doesn't win that job will still have a role in the defense. They'll be the 3rd safety, probably used in some hybrid packages. But really, to sum up their moves for their defense this offseason, they got one of the best defensive coordinators to lead the helm. They got a top 5 cornerback to play alongside another really good cornerback in Xavier Howard. They got a new leader in the middle of their defense in David Long, who has a lot of potential, and a very nice starting caliber safety to also help with the rotation in the back end. So when you combine all those pieces and then you throw in Vic Fangio calling the shots, I think the Dolphins have a great chance to return to 2020 form where their defense was one of the best in the league. And if you pair that with the Dolphins offense from last year, which still has Tua returning, they still have Teron Armstead, they're all pro left tackle, they still have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and they still have Mike McDaniel calling the plays, I think their offense is still going to be really good next year again. Their entire season comes down to the health of Tua Tagovailoa, and if he can get across the finish line. The pieces are there on both sides of the ball. The coaching staff is there. I really like their defensive coordinator. I really like their head coach. I think he's one of the best offensive coaches in the league. Everything is there for this team to accomplish, and it's really just about the health of their starting quarterback. And that's a huge question mark, but really the only question mark I have about this team in 2023. When Tua was playing last year, it's undeniable that he was playing at a top 10 quarterback level. He was in the MVP race for more than half of the season. So I do think Tua proved last year that he can be a really good quarterback, and now it's about taking another step in year number 2 in the same offense. The Dolphins insurance plan in case Tua does miss some time next year is Mike White, the former Jets quarterback. He gets to come home to South Florida, but I don't think he's going to step in and win multiple games for the Dolphins. He's an okay backup, but what I really see makes or breaks the Dolphins from being a serious contending team next year is the health of Tua. He's got to be available for 15 plus games next year and their postseason games, and if he is, I don't think it's crazy to say that the Dolphins could be playing next February. But let me know what you think about this Miami Dolphins team and how many games you think they'll win next year, and if you view them as a serious Super Bowl contender. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to subscribe if you are new. More NFL content is on the way. But with all that being said, I will catch you guys in my next one.